All right, next, we are toward the last item on our agenda, which is a city manager update on property acquisition. Jason?
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of tonight's agenda item is to brief the council and the community on two separate potential property acquisition actions that are currently under consideration by the city at this time. One we're more directly involved with, one less directly involved with. And although we can't share all of the details tonight regarding these items, I think it's important in the spirit of transparency that we can provide as much information to the public on these two items as possible. And so that's our goal for tonight. If you recall, we had scheduled this at the last city council meeting and unfortunately had received very late some new information that we needed to better understand before we could brief the public on it. So we had asked to push this item to tonight. So in just a minute, I'll have Steve come up and brief you on the first one, and then I'll brief you on the second item. But first, I wanted to just make a couple of introductory comments. And the first thing is that I know in our community right now, growth and development is a hot topic, obviously, and has generated a lot of conversation in the community. And we had some of that earlier tonight, and we'll have plenty of opportunities along the way to continue to address the different aspects of this topic as a whole. But in all of us, I think staff, city council understand, this is an important issue in Golden. But it's important for the community to know that from time to time, we look at different ways that the city can be involved in better controlling and managing and directing some of the more significant developments that come along in the city. An example of that would be DeLong Park on 23rd Street. You'll remember that from a year or so ago. We became aware the property was being sold. It would have likely been sold to a developer who would have put some type of housing on the site. And fortunately, due to Steve's great negotiating skills, we were able to acquire that piece of property and provide a park to a neighborhood that was desperately needed. And that is a very good example of when we were able to make a positive change for our community by stepping in. And I think it's a significant win for the city and for the community and for that particular neighborhood. So the two issues we'll be talking about tonight are really no different than that. Our ultimate goal is to try to take advantage of some opportunities that are available and to be in a better position as a city to dictate what might happen in two of these key areas of the city. So just like in the case of DeLong Park, our goal is to influence things and provide value to our community, both for the short term and for many years and perhaps even generations to come. So the last comment I'll make before we get into them is the timing is not always of our choosing either. And in both of these instances, we haven't necessarily chosen this particular time, but it's an opportunity that has presented itself. And given the nature of these two opportunities, as you'll see, I think it's important that we give consideration to both of them. So with those comments, I will ask Steve to come up and brief you on the first one. And hopefully I can work this. There are only 5 buttons, so I have a 20% chance. I'm down to, what, 80%? Yes, sir. Turn it on.
Steve's handing out paper.
In case anyone else in the neighborhood wants one.
Point it over here.
Could be hit.
Council, this evening, I am wanting to advise you of information we've received from Jefferson County very recently about and a request that's been made of them pertaining to the spec aggregate quarry out on Colfax and Heritage Square. So there we go.
Got it right.
I'm sorry, I have to do it this way. In 2002, Jefferson County received and processed a request for a land exchange of about 60 acres where the then owner of the aggregate quarry on Colfax received 60 acres at the north end of the Matthews Winters open space to the south of the quarry, and in exchange conveyed to Jefferson County a substantial amount of assets. They conveyed 60 acres at Heritage Square. They conveyed several hundred acres on North Table Mountain. They gave up mining rights to 160 acres up by Rocky Flats. And they promised to give, when they were done, 280 acres where the pit is. And so Jefferson County very, very meticulously reviewed that. It actually had helped them update their criteria for an exchange of open space property, and they take an exchange very, very seriously. But in the end, the county made the deal, and the folks in Heritage Dells were some of the biggest beneficiaries, because the 60 acres that Jeffco Open Space got immediately was the trailhead of Apex Trail right behind those homes on Berthoud Way at the south end of Heritage Dells. So Jeffco has received another request, and they have scheduled 2 meetings so far, March 2nd in the morning, which is a Saturday, March 5th in the afternoon, and they want to start talking to the community about this exchange. What we know is that the proposal from Martin Marietta Materials, the current owner of the quarry, is that Martin Marietta would deed 114 acres at Heritage Square, and the 5.7, we call it Nancy Bachman property, but it actually was the Leon Bachman property on the east side of Heritage Road, right north of Colfax, to Jeffco, and that the county would deed about 64 acres at the very north end of Matthews Winters Park to Martin Marietta Materials, for a portion of that being a buffer and a portion of that being quarry activity. What I know from 2002 is that the deal will be much more complicated than that, but that is, in general, the proposal that the Jefferson County Open Space Advisory Commission and then the Board of County Commissioners will need to consider. There's a couple aspects that are really important to the city of Golden, one of which is, it is my understanding that it's very likely that the county will want to convey the Bachman property to the cities to integrate it more fully with the property we own that surrounds it. We basically surround that property with the Bachman acquisition. Should that happen, the community and your final decision would have to figure out what to do with that parcel. But it's a parcel that has been of concern to the Heritage Dells and other neighbors there over the years as to what would its eventual fate be. So that's pretty important to the community. The second thing very important to the community is what happens with Heritage Square property. The area by the Alpine Slide is pretty easy to predict. Nothing happens with that. But what happens with the rest of Heritage Square is a decision and a process that the county will want to talk about at these 2 meetings. But my prediction is they don't see that decision happening during the course of the exchange. They will probably want to talk about the exchange on its own merits and the fact that having Golden and Jeffco control of the square is a positive to the whole community, and that we'd all be involved in some sort of later process. I don't have any details about that, but that's what, as Mr. Slawinski mentioned, a couple things. It's a way to, as our Golden Vision principle directs us to do, to manage and direct change, but also a tremendous asset if the county does decide to convey the Bachman property to us. A challenge for us to figure out what's the best community use that can be easily sustained and managed on the property, but pretty important. And that is really all I know. I will certainly be at both meetings, and the county staff has been very inclusive of us when they could. They couldn't really tell us anything most of the time, but now that they have this application and they're publicly reviewing it, County staff is very, very inclusive and cooperative, and I think this will be a great opportunity for Golden and Jeffco. So I invite you to come to the meetings, and that's why it's not conflicting with coffee, which is later that afternoon.
On the north side of town.
Yeah.
That's all I have, and that's really all we know. I know that on this flyer, which is going to be on our website, it's going to be on our newsletter, they have a website and an email address. The website may not be active until tomorrow morning, but they are being as open and transparent as they can, and I encourage us all to participate.
Questions? Laura?
Based on the last time there was an exchange, what's your best estimate on how long the process takes?
Yeah, long time. Mr. Hobie from the County Open Space Department thinks it could be done by the end of summer.
And you think that's realistic?
I don't know, I've never done anything that complicated. Selling Beaverbrook was easy. Just figure out how much it's worth and get the federal government to buy it. So I don't know. It's a pretty complicated negotiation.
It's complicated, thanks.
Anyone else on this side with questions? Over here, Ron.
Am I misremembering, is the part of the Bachman property not part of the city, not annexed in?
This entire 5.7 acres is not part of the city.
So we would have to deal with that at some point, if all things come to pass.
Yes, it would become a jurisdictional anomaly not to, if we ended up owning it, we would recommend that, if nothing else, for public safety purposes, because we can own land outside the city, but for public safety and other purposes, it would certainly make sense to incorporate it.
All right, that was.
Thank you. I'll see you at the meetings.
Thank you. That was big news, and now there's the second issue.
All right.
Jason.
Thank you, Mayor. Second one, number 2, we're just going to shift gears a little bit and talk about a completely different area of the city, and that is an area that lies east of Ford Street, centered around 10th Street. And I'm going to refer a lot to my notes because I don't want to miss anything important. So hope to accomplish 2 things in this briefing, and first describe what we're talking about, and then get into a little bit of why we're considering it and talking about it. So a little bit of background on this one. A few months ago, we were approached by Molson Coors and it advised the city that they were planning to dispose of some of the property they currently own for potential redevelopment. Coors has been pretty good about letting us know, as the city government, letting us know on plans that it has that might impact our community. So we appreciated that. Their contact at that point was really just to advise us of what their plan was. And what their plan is, you can see up here in blue, and that is this area highlighted is an area that they are looking to dispose of and sell. It would be very likely that the property would be redeveloped in some kind, or less likely, maybe even a single user who would have a need for a large office building. But that was their intent. We began to take a closer look at this internally and started to have the conversation about whether it made any sense for the city to acquire this area from Coors. And over several weeks of conversation, concluded that we should seriously take a look at this. And I'll outline some of the reasons why, but first want to talk a little bit about what we're exactly talking about. What you see here in this area outlined in blue is about 8 acres of land, and most of it has parking on it, but there is a large office building there currently on towards the bottom part of that picture. It's about 5 stories, I think it's 5 stories, and has about 160,000 square feet. Molson Coors currently doesn't use the entire building, and so that's the reason they're looking to sell it. They have just a handful of employees that are in that building and have moved other employees out to other areas of their operation. So, and then the parking lots generally have been there to serve this building. Let me give you a few other photos here. Just so you have an idea of what we're talking about, there's the front of the building from 10th Street, looking from 10th Street. Again, about 160,000 square feet. This is about 6 blocks directly east of here. The address is 311 10th Street. And there's a shot I wanted to, and forgive me for the imagery, we don't have a lot of good pictures, and this is more Google Earth stuff, but it gives you perspective of where the building is in relation to the rest of downtown Golden. And there's 10th Street out front. You can see the parking lots on the north side of 10th Street, which would be towards the bottom of the picture. And this shot is from the other side of the building, really looking along where Clear Creek is. There's some green space towards the rear side of the building. And then we don't have any really good interior pictures. This is, I think, the only one I've got that kind of shows what the inside of the building itself looks like. It's as I said, a 5-story building. Has an open atrium, and it's served by 4 elevators, and it's mostly office space around this open atrium concept. Our intent with the purchase of this building and the land that was outlined in that first slide would be to create a true civic center type concept for our community. The city would look to invest some money and refurbish parts of the existing building and create a space that would not only serve as a home to city government, but also, and perhaps even more importantly, to many of our golden cultural institutions, and provide them with a lot of space that they need. So the vision would be to create a great community gathering place for civic and cultural activities that hopefully would last us for many years to come. As for the vacant land adjacent to the building, obviously much of it would probably be needed as parking, but it may present opportunities for new development in that particular neighborhood. So the important part, I think, that I want to note is that in terms of how the area ends up developing, as the owner of the property, it puts us in a good position of having control over really what the property looks like in the future in terms of the vision and what this area of the community ultimately might become and look like. So let me talk a little bit about why we're taking a look at this in a bit more detail, now that you know what it is. There are 4 main reasons why we would look at this potential project. And the why part of it has really been informed by thinking through the opportunities presented, but also informed by several of the studies and different exercises we've done over the course of the last several years. The first one you will all recall back in September, we received a report. We had engaged an architecture firm in town and received a report on our own space needs, the needs of Golden City government. We asked them to look at it over the next 5 to 20 years. And at that time, you all received the report, heard a presentation. We talked about our short-term needs being relatively solved, but that in the long term, that we would need approximately 70,000 square feet of space, and space that we currently don't have in the collection of various buildings that we operate from. So the report identified that need for our police department, for General City Hall administrative offices, Park and Rec admin, planning and public works admin. They looked at all of those different functions. Municipal court, council chambers, and our history staff were all part of that evaluation in determining that. So as I've said, the building itself that is on this property has about 160,000 square feet, way more than we would need to accommodate the long-term needs of the city, but would give us an opportunity not only to address those needs for the foreseeable future, but also to incorporate other community uses, as I will get into in a bit here. Excuse me, in a bit here. Second, we recently, over the last year, have had the Golden Investment Forum Task Force working on reviewing in our investment priorities for the city. So we've asked them to do this work, and some of the needs that they have identified, in particular, relate to some of our cultural institutions in the city. So they've looked at that, this is the latest report that they issued this past January, highlighting a number of the needs. City facilities was one of them, and certainly needs of our cultural entities was also identified. The report and the recommendations to look at those things also is aligned with some of the conversations I've had over the years with the different directors of our various cultural entities about the needs that they have in terms of growing programming and the opportunities that lack because of aging and insufficient infrastructure and facilities. So this civic center concept hopefully would address the needs of our own facility needs, but the needs of our cultural entities in our community as well, and give them the space that they can grow and continue to add value to our community. We also did this report, probably, I think it was about 2011, this report, and Mayor, you might be the only one on City Council today that will remember, was on City Council at the time this report was done. But with the acquisition of this property, the city would essentially control a vast majority of property in the Clear Creek corridor from this new Civic Center location all the way to the existing campground on the end of 10th Street. That's a long way. It's a lot of property, and to have the ability to control a lot of that in the corridor would be very important. In creating this Civic Center concept, we would move and relocate many of our city government functions to that new location, and would no longer have the need for the existing buildings here, which presents an opportunity for the Golden community to think about and reimagine what the Clear Creek corridor could look like and be. This report did some of that back in 2011. It talked about parks and plazas and special event and open space were all contemplated in there and were talked about as options. But one of the obstacles and roadblocks that was identified at the time was all of the buildings that we currently occupy and hold here along the Creek corridor. A lot of our municipal government buildings have taken up much of the valuable space that is along Clear Creek, as you all know. So by moving many of our functions, it would allow our community to kind of rethink and reimagine how the Clear Creek corridor should be. And this is obviously some of the most valuable land in our city, and so it would be important that we would go through an extensive public engagement process and really talk with our community about what this new vision for the corridor ought to look like. And lastly, the fourth point of the why we're talking about this and contemplating it is the ultimate control that purchasing this 8 acres of property gives us east of Ford Street. Coors is going to sell the land regardless of whether we acquired it or not. And it could be developed into something else. We don't know what it would look like. But not owning the land doesn't give us the same level of control as if we were to acquire it, and what ultimately that area of our city ends up looking like. So these are some of the things, the main 4 points that we've been thinking about as to why we would want to contemplate acquiring this property for the benefit of our community. And the last thing I'll mention is a brief word on the financing aspect. I know that will be a question that many folks have, and we've had conversations over the course of the last budget year about our city's budget, and in particular, how conservatively we have budgeted this past year. I don't want to get into all the weeds of the financing end of this, but if we were to move forward on this type of purchase, we'd certainly look to do it through issuing certificates of participation or essentially debt to acquire and build out this project. Debt service is exactly for these types of projects, large-scale facility kinds of projects. We built city shops in the same manner, golf course, community center. When you build something of that nature, cities generally will do it through this means. So, and this project would be no different. That it's important, though, to understand that the debt service for a project like this would come from the city's capital improvement fund and not from our operating budget. That's a big distinction. The operating budget obviously provides all of these services that our residents enjoy. This purchase would not impact that part of our budget, rather would be out of our capital improvement budget. And to that point, we have currently in our capital improvement fund a debt service that we pay now. It's roughly about $3.6 million a year, and we pay that on current debt that we have for previous projects we've had, like the city shops. But in 2020, we make the last of some of the largest payments on that. We're able to retire some of that. So what happens is we beginning in 2021, have some debt service capacity with which we could use to fund this project. We'll have more conversations if we choose to keep moving forward on this about what that looks like, dollar amounts, specific numbers. We'll have more conversation about the specific numbers of it, and a lot of it's going to relate back to negotiations and how all that comes together if we continue to move forward on this project. And we'll have more conversation about how that fits into the overall plan and our capital improvement fund. But that's an initial comment on the financing and budget aspect of this project. So that's what I have for you tonight, Mayor and Council. Obviously, not able to share all the details regarding the negotiations. We're going to be in executive session later, talking a bit more about the specifics of the negotiations. But I thought it was important that our community be made aware of this potential acquisition. You know, it's a big deal. It's a bold and certainly a big project, but has the potential to be an exciting improvement for the Golden community overall. So I put the Guiding Golden logo up there because we will continue to post information starting tomorrow about this project, post updates as we have more information, and we'll have a feature where residents can ask questions if they have them as they review the material, and we'll post answers so everyone can see them. So that's what I have for you tonight.
Are you going to take questions?
Sure.
Are there questions on this side? How about over here? I would just like to ask a question. This property is right on Clear Creek, and it's close to Vanover Park, but it doesn't feel connected to the rest of the town. Do you have any thoughts on making a connection?
Yeah, Mayor, that's a great question. We've had some internal conversation, Steve and I and Rod Tarullo, our Parks Director, about how we would better make that connection. I think there's some opportunity with the acquisition that we would invest in making some trail connections along the creek corridor. If I go back, actually, you can see, let's see if I can do it. There's the two smaller parcels towards the, I guess that would be southwest of the building, towards the bottom of the screen, would it be included in that purchase? And that would give us an opportunity to kind of connect with Vanover Park potentially and make some trail connections there on that side of the property. So we would certainly look to make those investments as part of the overall project.
And anyone else? Yeah, so I hope you felt like your time was worthwhile to wait for this report.
Thank you for
or
those
these
that
two reports. So thank you, Jason, for sharing that. And I know Guiding Golden will probably get a surge in readership pretty soon because You call it a big deal. This is a big deal for our whole community, and we all really need to talk about this together. So, thank you, and thanks, Steve, for your presentation as well.